Oh, yes, I did. It was a big one, actually. It started way back when I was 16, and I started going out with a guy called Peter, and we went out together for 5 years. And after 5 years, I became pregnant. And so I, thought we would get married and with Pete and I, and everything would fall into place, but it didn't, because he told me he didn't want to go out with me anymore. So at 21 years of age, I found myself alone, carrying a baby. And the worst thing of all was that my parents didn't know I had a boyfriend. My parents had met Peter a long time ago, 5 years previous, and he didn't impress them very much, and they basically told me I was not to go out with him anymore. Well, I'd been going out with him for 5 years. A girlfriend had called for me every night that I went out to go to this next town where Peter lived, and then we'd gone our own way. She went to visit her friend and go out with her friend, and of course Peter and I stayed together. I would stay there weekends, saying I was staying at Betty's or at her friend's house, because Betty was the one who used to call for me. And so it was a very difficult situation, but finally I had the baby. I told my parents, and they made sure I moved away from home so that anybody wouldn't see me and know me. And after I'd had the baby, I gave it up for adoption. Well, during our time together, that Peter and I had been together, I'd occasionally met this guy called Barry, who was one of his friends, and he was in the army. And a couple of times he'd come home from the army, and we had been together, and he had said to me, what's wrong with you and Pete? And I'd said, oh, we're not seeing each other for a while. And he'd say, well, can I take you out? So, of course, I went out with him. And then, of course, he would go away, and then Peter and I would get back together again. Well, when Barry came home after Peter and I had fallen out and were no longer seeing each other, and I was very heavily pregnant, he thought I was going to marry Peter. He asked me about, what was I going to do? And I was wearing a wedding ring at the time, and he said to me, how long I'd been married and all of this kind of thing. And I just had to tell him that I wasn't married, and that I was waiting to have the child adopted, which I'd decided to do. He was home for 2 weeks, and I was about 8.5 months pregnant. And he never once asked me to be intimate with him. He never once asked me to be close to him. We just went out, we had coffee. In those days, I smoked cigarettes, and there wasn't any warning about it. We'd sit in this cafe day after day after day, talking. And just before he went back, which was just before I had the baby, he told me he thought that he loved me. And I knew that I loved him, but he was going away to the Persian Gulf. So away he went. I went into hospital, I had the baby, and I gave the baby up for adoption, and I went home. And I met with a friend of mine called Jane. And she lived a distance away from where I was living now, but we used to meet in the city of Nottingham, which is where I came from. And we'd go out and have fun, and I'd stay at her house for the weekend. Well, I was writing to Barry, and we were writing to each other. And we actually wrote in a different ink every day for about 7 days, 7 days in one ink, and then 7 days in another ink. And we got very pally with each other, got very personal with each other. And then he started talking about coming home. He also talked about getting engaged, but he also talked about going to a hotel and finding out how we went together. Well, I wasn't going to go through that again that I'd gone through, the having a baby issue, and I wasn't going to be intimate with any man from that time on. And so I got so frightened that I decided I was going to close the door to Barry, and I did do. I wrote him a letter, and he was really awful and said I should be horsewhipped and all the horrible things that men say when they're thwarted. And I started going out with my girlfriend Jane, and we had a great time. I'd been there all weekend, and I was going to go home in the evening. And so I had a very strong feeling I wanted to go home because I just wanted to have the next day off, which was Whitsun Monday, and it was the public holiday, and then I had to go back to work again. So I decided to go home, and my friend Jane said, oh, just stay overnight. You can go home early in the morning. And I said, no, I want to go home now. And she said, no, just stay overnight. We can go out again tonight. Well, we'd had such a fabulous weekend. I thought, oh yeah, well, why not? So the following morning at 7 o'clock, I got to the bus stop, and there was a bus just leaving. It was actually going out. I couldn't catch it. And there was another woman there with 2 children who was exactly the same as I was. So we sat commiserating with each other, and we decided, she said to me, you might as well sit and talk to me, and I decided to do so. So we were sitting talking, and she's telling me about her cousin who in the last few weeks had taken 8 hours to get from the Persian Gulf to Hucknall, which is where he lived, and yet it had taken her 8 hours to get from one end of Nottingham to the other. And she said, oh, I feel so sorry for him. She said, he's been home for 2 weeks and hasn't been out with a girl. She said he was supposed to get engaged to this girl when he came home, but she's finished with him. And she talked about the Persian Gulf. She talked about Hucknall. She talked about, this guy and the engagement. And then she said, and I said to him, Barry, you've got to go out and enjoy yourself. And I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And I knew she was talking about Barry, the man, I'd been going out with. So I asked her if she was talking about him, and she said, yes, do you know him? Well, I didn't know what to say, and I said to her, I'm the girl he was supposed to get engaged to. Well, if looks could kill, I'd be dead now. But I felt as if she wanted to hit me across the face, to be perfectly honest. Anyway, she said to me, he's terrible since, she said, he's absolutely terrible. She said, he must have loved you very much. And I said, I think he did. But I explained to her about the night in the hotel and the fact that I didn't want to spend any time with him on a personal level. And she could understand that. And I said to her, just before I saw the bus come in, and we both did, and I said to her, I've got some photographs of Barry's I would like to send him. Where can I send them? She said, why don't you get his dad to go to ring the Malt Shovel pub, which was where his dad went, and get his dad to tell him to give you a call. Well, I did that at noon, and his father was there. And then at 3:30, after his father had gone home, the phone rang at home, and it was Barry. And it was a very stilted conversation. But finally, as he was just about to put the phone down and he'd given me the address of where to send the photographs, I said to him, would you like to come for dinner? And he said, yeah, I think I'd like that. So I said, well, it's a 2-bus journey. He says, I don't care. And apparently, according to his mother, who told me this later on, he raced home, had a bath, got himself change of clothes and got himself all sorted out and came down to where I was living. And we had dinner. He met my parents, and of course they liked him. I think they were just glad somebody was showing an interest in me at that point of time. Because in those days, if you were 21 or 22 and you weren't married, you were a spinster. You were on the shelf. And your parents would do anything to try and get you married. And so we went out after the dinner. We went into Nottingham and we had a great evening. And he came back with me, and he stayed, not wanting any personal contact with me. And we saw each other every day from that day onwards. He hardly went home. And then when he had to go back to London, to his unit, I got the measles. So I had to stay a few weeks, behind him. But finally, when I was over the measles, he'd written to me every day, phoned me every day. And I went to London, and of course we were married. We got married within 6 weeks, actually, of that fatal meeting at the bus stop. It's such an incredible story, because I always think to myself, who put me at that bus stop? Why didn't I go home on the Sunday night? You know, who arranged everything? There had to be a great arranger. There had to be somebody, you know, who put me at the right place at the right time to meet that woman. It was quite an incredible experience. And of course, I was married to him for 23 years. Unfortunately, I don't get to see him anymore. But it was an incredible experience, and we had a very happy marriage. We had 2 children, and I know that it was meant to be. I know that. But it was so incredible how we came to be together after we'd split up all those weeks, and I'd been out enjoying myself. But then when we met each other again, it was almost as if we'd never been apart. So there you are, that's the story.